Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Are you all together? Sabi ko pinabay sa atin. Leave the people. Put it back. Hey, that's it. No, it's not good. I'm just looking for
Hare Krishna. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Ya Gopi Jana Vallabha Grivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Grivaradhari. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari. Yamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari. Yamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. โอมนะโมภะคะวะเตวาสุเดวายะโอมนะโมภะคะวะเตวาสุเดวายะโอมนะโมภะคะวะเตวาสุเดวายะโอมนะโมภะคะวะเตวาสุเดวายะโอมนะโมภะคะวะเตวาสุเดวายะโอมนะโมภะคะวะเตวาสุเดวายะ Bhagavad Gita 6.11 to 6.12. Thank you. Six point 11 to 6.12. शुचौ देशे प्रतिष्ठाप्य स्थिरम् आसनम् आत्मनः नात्युच्छ्रितं नातिनीचं चैलाजीनकुशोत्तरम् तत्रैकाग्रं मनः कृत्वा यथा चित्तेन्द्रियक्रिया उपविश्यासने युञ्ज्यात् योगम् आत्मविशुद्धये शुचौ देशे प्रतिष्ठाप्य स्थिरम् आसनमात्मनः नात्युच्छ्रितं नातिनीचं चैलाजीनकुशोत्तरम् तत्रैकाग्रं मनः कृत्वा यथा चित्तेन्द्रियक्रिया उपविश्यासने युञ्ज्यात् योगम् आत्मविशुद्धये. Would you like to?
What, the whole thing?
Yeah.
Shucho deshe pratishthapya
स्थिरम् आसनम् आत्मनः नात्युच्छ्रितं नातिनीचं चैलाजीनकुशोत्तरम् तत्रैकाग्रं मनः कृत्वा यत्ता चित्तेन्द्रियक्रिया उपविश्यासने युञ्ज्यात् योगम् आत्मविशुद्धये. Shuchau, word for word. Shuchau, in a sanctified. Deshe, land. Pratishtapya, placing. Sthiram, firm. Asanam, seat. Atmana, his own. Na, not. Ati, too. Uchritam, high. Na, no. Ati, too. Nicham, low. Jaila ajina, of soft cloth and deer skin. Kusha, and kusha grass. Uttaram, covering. Tatra, thereupon. Ekagram, with one attention. Mana, mind. Kritva, making. Yata chitta, controlling the mind. Indriya, senses. Kriya, and activities. Upavishya, sitting. Asane, on the seat. Yunjyat, should execute. Yogam, yoga practice. Atma, the heart. Vishuddhaya, for clarifying. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. To practice yoga, one should go to a secluded place and should lay kusha grass on the ground and then cover it with a deer skin and a soft cloth. The seat should be neither too high nor too low and should be situated in a sacred place. The yogi should then sit on it very firmly and practice yoga to purify the heart by controlling his mind, senses, and activities and fixing the mind on one point. Do we go through the translation like we do in SB as well?
You want me to repeat it?
Do we do that?
No.
Okay, fine. Therefore, sacred place refers to places of pilgrimage. In India, the yogis, the transcendentalists, or the devotees all leave home and reside in sacred places such as Prayag, Mathura, Vrindavan, Rishikesh, and Haridwar, and in solitude practice yoga where the sacred rivers like the Yamuna and the Ganges flow. But often this is not possible, especially for Westerners. The so-called yoga societies in big cities may be successful in earning material benefit, but they are not at all suitable for the actual practice of yoga. One who is not self-controlled and whose mind is not undisturbed cannot practice meditation. Therefore, in the Brihannaradya Purana, it is said that in Kali Yuga, the present yuga or age, when people in general are short-lived, slow in spiritualization and always disturbed by various anxieties, the best means of spiritualization is chanting the holy name of the Lord. Harinama, Harinama, Hariname eva kevalam, Kalau naste eva naste eva katir anyatha. In this age of quarrel and hypocrisy, the only means of deliverance is chanting the holy name of the Lord. There is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way. Om Jnanitimrandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurun Shri Yuttapadakaram Shri Gurun Vaishnavamascha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahaganal Garuknatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadhavaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamascha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinubandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Prabhupada ki Jai. Thank you for joining me. Hare Krishna. Okay, I am still going to seek your blessings so that I can speak something that is meaningful, both to you as well as the people that are listening online. And also to purify myself, because I need a lot of purification. So is this even working? Okay, that's better. Okay, so first thing is just to give context around this verse itself, chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita. So the chapter 6 is actually titled Dhyan Yoga. So meditational yoga. And the whole background here is that during the verses of 6.10 to 6.36, Krishna is actually describing the whole aspect of Ashtanga Yoga and the eightfold Ashtanga Yoga. So in this specific verse of 6.11 to 6.12, Krishna is going through and describing the place of sitting in terms of where you should sit for meditation when you're practicing Ashtanga Yoga or Dhyan Yoga. So he goes through both. So if we just read the translation out again. To practice yoga, one should go to a secluded place and should lay kusha grass on the ground and then cover it with a deerskin and cloth. The seat should be neither too high nor too low and should be situated in a sacred place. So in the first half of the translation, Srila Prabhupada's translation and Krishna are actually going through and describing exactly where to sit and how to sit. And the latter half of the translation, the yogi should then sit on it very firmly and practice yoga to purify the heart by controlling his mind, senses and activities and fixing the mind on one point. So the second half of the translation is actually referring to what the objective of such a sitting posture is, and what the whole point of Dhyan Yoga or this Ashtanga Yoga is. So right off the back we can see that there's two halves to the translation. And in the purple you'll see that Srila Prabhupada actually focuses on the latter part. But before we go to the latter part, just for the new joiners, the verses are 6.11 to 6.12. So before we go into exactly the purport and the way Srila Prabhupada has given and actually commented on the verse itself, there are three things that the translation actually includes that is quite important to Dhyan Yoga in general. So the first is, to practice yoga, one should go to a secluded place. So that's the first one. Second one is, they should lay kusha grass on the ground. That's the second, so kusha grass. And the third thing is, cover it with deerskin and soft cloth. So if we think about the days where people used to go to the forests, then this is where they would practice a lot of this stuff. They'd actually go to the forest, they'd lay kusha grass, they'd stay away from as many people as they could and just meditate. Either nowadays you see a lot of people meditating on voidness, or trying to. Back then they would meditate on voidness as well as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, in various forms. But what exactly is the reason to call out these things like a secluded place, or the kusha grass, or deer skin, or the soft cloth? So we actually go through and understand exactly what these items mean and why they're so important for Dhyana Yoga. Then we'll see that to go to a secluded place is basically so that we can fix our mind in meditation. If we're with family, friends, if we're in a congregation, if we're in a city life, as we call it in the modern day, then it's very difficult to sit and just meditate non-stop, to completely fix our mind on one thing. If we talk about kusha grass nowadays, we're like, we have these mats to sit on in the temple. But the whole background of kusha grass is that it's actually a very purifying sort of material. And the way it helps in meditation, especially in the forest, is that it's naturally, the grass itself is very insulating. So if you can imagine going to a forest and it will be cold sometimes, it will be warm sometimes, and the ground itself might get muddy, etc., and get cold. So the whole aspect of kusha grass is to combat that cold and damp sort of feel, so that you're not sitting on that sort of material. But the thing with kusha grass is that it's grass, so the edges are quite sharp. So in order to combat that sharpness, you can get deer skin. And what deer skin does is that it softens the seat, as well as increasing the insulation. And the other aspect with deer skin, and sometimes they use tiger skin as well, is that it can actually act as a repellent for reptiles, snakes, and these insects, etc., because they don't like the deer skin or the tiger skin at all. So scorpions, snakes, and all these creatures, these critters that you get in the forest, they would stay away from your meditation. So in that way you can come back to the same point of just fixing your mind on the meditation that you're performing. You don't get distracted by the animals, etc. And then with soft cloth, I couldn't actually find much on this in terms of why, but just logically speaking, I think it's more of the aspect that as you're a practicing yogi, you want to stay as clean as possible, you want to stay as comfortable as possible, especially since you're meditating. So the soft cloth just acts as that sort of cushion to keep it soft, to keep it very clean for you to basically sit and just perform meditation. So we go to the second half. So that's the aspect of the whole Dhyana Yoga and what they actually did in the forests. Now in this day and age, if we actually look around and look at society in general, like how many people go to the forest to meditate? Almost nobody, right? And even those that do, what we see is that they struggle. They might follow these, they might go to a secluded place, they might sit on kusha grass, cover it with deer skin and soft cloth, but very quickly they'll realize, okay, they're missing something, right? So they come back to the cities, come back to normal life, right? At the everyday life. So that brings us to the second part of the translation, which is that the yogi should then sit on it very firmly and practice yoga to purify the heart by controlling his mind, senses and activities and fixing the mind on one point. Now, we're all chant in the mornings, right? We try to focus on the chanting, but how many of us can actually chant for 2 hours straight and focus attentively on the japa? I cannot. So, yeah, I don't think. David Prabhu, are you able to focus on your japa for 2 hours straight?
Yeah, just ignore the football thoughts.
Exactly, right? It's as if David Prabhu gave a really nice example. It's like a football court where the ball is just the mind, our concentration is just going from one side of the court to the other side, to the other side, to the other side. Sometimes it's in our court, sometimes it goes into the enemy's goal, and sometimes it goes into our goal. Sometimes we actually focus on the japa, and sometimes we end up completely going off rail, off track, and we forget that we're even chanting, right? And I'll put my hand up and say that I've even fallen asleep whilst chanting as well. So, that's completely the enemy scored 10 goals up against me or something, But this is the whole aspect of the day and age. Meditation itself, our mind is chanchal, right? We cannot actually fix our mind on anything, right? It takes a lot of effort, a lot of determination and practice to fix our mind on anything. What to think of fixing our mind on voidness, right? When we're practicing japa in Krishna consciousness, we're trying to actually meditate on the names, on Krishna's form, pastimes. And we're finding that difficult. What to speak of trying to practice thinking of nothingness? But a lot of these yogis will try to do that, because in their minds, the whole aspect of purifying the heart by controlling the mind, senses and activities, and fixing the mind on one point is about retracting themselves from all parts of the world, right? They retract their minds and senses and activities by secluding themselves, by going away from family, friends, the city life, and engaging in activities in general. Sometimes they will just go to the forest, stay in the forest for as long as they can, live off of the trees, the fruits, etc. that you get, and go that way. But they struggle. And if we bring it back to the whole aspect of what's happening in Bhagavad Gita, which is obviously a battlefield where Arjuna is confused as to what he should be doing, what he should be engaging in 6.33, Arjuna actually expresses, and this is after these verses on the Dhyana Yoga aspect and meditation aspect, Arjuna is actually expressing to Krishna that the system of yoga, this Dhyana Yoga, that Krishna has described, appears to be impractical and unendurable. And he explains that it's basically because his mind is so restless and unsteady. Okay, one might think, he's in a battlefield, so he's in that sort of like mode of passion sort of environment where he's struggling. He's thinking, okay, I've got my enemies, they're my family, I don't know what to do, I just want a nice peaceful life, just go to the forest. That might be a good option, and that's something that he did consider. But we actually have another example in the Srimad Bhagavatam. I believe it's Canto 4 or 5 with Bharat Maharaj. So he is a king, and I'll just briefly talk about the story to give the context for this. But he's a king, and he's at that stage in life whereby he's done everything, completed all his duties, and he's ready to just renounce life. So he's given up his post, he's given up his family, and he's actually gone to meditate in the forest. And he's quite successful at it. He goes, he meditates on the Supreme Lord, so he's not meditating on voidness, but he's meditating on something. But what happens? He comes across a mother deer who is scared of a lion that's roaring. And in that roar, the mother deer starts running away and has a miscarriage, where the baby deer basically comes out. And Bharat Maharaj sees this, and he becomes very compassionate towards the deer. In his mind, he's thinking, deer, living entity, part and parcel of Krishna, let me look after the deer. But in doing that, he's started already breaking his whole aspect on why he went to the forest, which is to seclude himself so that he could fix his mind on the Lord. And as we read further on in Srimad Bhagavatam, we actually find that Bharat Maharaj got attached to the deer so much that he actually forgot his duty of serving the Lord. And at the time of death, as we know, he was so attached to the deer that he thought of the deer at the time of death instead of on Krishna. So we have both aspects here already. We have Arjuna, who's in that very mode of passion, in a battlefield, who's naturally going to have a very flickering mind because of what's going on. But then we also have on the other side Bharat Maharaj, who's actually in that mode of meditating in the forest, who's got agitated because of this deer. So we can see that actually this whole aspect of trying to seclude yourself from society, to actually reserve and withdraw all your senses, your mind, your activities, does not work. Because Bharat Maharaj, as we know, is a very high-level pure devotee. But he still had that aspect where he got attached to a deer. So this brings us to the point of, everybody has to act in the world, because that is the natural tendency that we all see. Bharat Maharaj, who was in the forest, he could have completely just ignored the deer and just continued his activities of just serving the Lord, meditating on the Lord. But he had a tendency to act. And that tendency actually comes from the nature of being living. One of the characteristics of living, and I'm not speaking even spiritual living at this point, I'm speaking material living right now. One of the characteristics is that we are moving, or we are always acting, right? We cannot stay idle as material entities who are living beings. We might say, we call a tree being a living being, but how is that moving? Well, we see that the trees are growing, and they're not growing in any direction, they're growing towards the sunlight. Right? Plants, trees, animals, they're all moving, critters, everything that we see that moves is living in a way. And from that, we can actually understand, if we go spiritual side and actually go deeper in that whole aspect of what does being living actually mean. If living is, from a material sense, is that we're always moving, then even from a spiritual sense, it means that if we're a living entity from a spiritual aspect, that means that the soul's tendency is to act. Right? Because otherwise we should be able to withdraw all of our senses from a material sense, because Bharat Maharaj Arjun knew that they were not material bodies, they were actually spirit souls. But they still needed to act. They could not focus themselves so much that they simply withdraw all their senses and just focus on one thing. So, with that being understood that, okay, we all have to act, then a natural question is, well, what's the point of yoga? Right? Because the whole aspect of yoga in the modern day and age is to completely withdraw ourselves, to think of nothing and just focus on one thing, or voidness, and just withdraw ourselves from society, etc. But if we actually go to the root word of what yoga means, it means to connect. Right? Now the question is, what should we connect to? Now on one level you could say you can connect to the environment around you, your family, your friends, the environment that you're in, society. But then you go higher and higher and you actually realize that you can connect to all those things and term them as yoga, in quotes, but it's temporary, because as you age, as life goes on, then you realize that this whole yoga aspect of focusing on material aspects, whether it's material relationships or material society, etc., the whole aspect of the material world is temporary, and it goes away either with time or with your death. So the ultimate goal of yoga is actually to connect to the Supreme Lord. And this is even given in the Bhagavad Gita in 6.47, where Krishna says, Yoginam api sarvesham madgate nantaratmanaha shaddhavan bhajiteyo mam samayuktatamo mataha. Translation: and of all the yogis, the one with great faith who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental and loving service to me. He is most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. That is my opinion. So the end of the 6th chapter, which, if you recall, is titled Dhyana Yoga, Krishna has himself given the fact that actually more than Dhyana Yoga, more than any sort of yoga, the highest yoga is Bhakti Yoga. It's about thinking of Krishna, it's about rendering service unto him. And if we actually go through this, right, so the first one is, always abides in me. So that is where to actually situate ourselves. Now if we think about the verse that we're going through, 6.11 to 6.12, we're talking about, okay, kusha grass, sitting down on there, your seating place shouldn't be too high, too low. But here we're talking about where Krishna should reside. Second, here is always thinking of me within himself. And that in itself is again giving us how to fix out, how to control our mind and senses. Because if we're focusing on Krishna, if that's our meditation, not just 2 hours that we're sitting down doing japa, or if we're in the forest, then the 1-2 hours or 24 hours that we're trying to meditate on nothingness, but throughout the whole day. And then the third thing, which is the most important one, renders transcendental loving service to me. Krishna is telling us in 6.47 that actually we have to act. We can't just not act. So whereas in 6.11, 6.12, the whole aspect of Dhyana Yoga, one could argue or think that what Krishna is saying is that we should actually completely retract our senses, completely retract all of our activities, and just do nothing, right? Completely become impersonal, or just meditate 24/7 on voidness. In 6.47, Krishna is just saying that no, the highest form of controlling our senses, activities, etc., is to focus on him, is to render service to him. So he's giving us how to act. And in that way, Krishna is basically just, through the progression of chapter 6, he's given us the fact that the highest form of yoga is Bhakti Yoga. 6.11 and 12 go through the seating posture of Dhyana Yoga, but ultimately giving us the principle, which is that we should practice yoga to purify the heart by controlling the mind, senses and activities by fixing it on one point. So, okay, that's good. So we've established that Bhakti Yoga is the topmost, but what does Bhakti Yoga actually mean? How do we actually practice Bhakti Yoga? Because if we think about the verse, it's, okay, we sit down, we have a seating place for, in our day and age, it's mats, right, to sit down, and we're also meditating. So what's the difference between Dhyana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga? And that's where Srila Prabhupada actually gives us in the purport the actual progression and understanding on how Bhakti Yoga is so relevant for us and why it's the topmost. So if we actually take each of the items again, so the secluded place, the sitting place in terms of kusha, grass, deerskin, etc. So a secluded place. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about sacred place refers to pilgrimages. Or if we just skip further, then residing in sacred places like Prayag, Mathura, Vrindavan, Rishikesh, Haridwar, etc. and practicing yoga. Now for Bhakti Yoga, our secluded place or sacred place isn't about retracting ourselves from people. It's about retracting ourselves from people who aren't interested in Bhakti Yoga. Because the whole aspect for practicing any of this is to purify the heart by controlling the mind senses and fixing on one point, which is fixing on Krishna. So as practicing Bhakti Yogis, what we should be doing is trying to find places or people, devotees, that we can engage with, that we can render service with, that we can do japa with, just render transcendental loving service to the Lord, with that mind fixed on serving Krishna. And that's our secluded place. So whereas for Dhyana Yogis, secluded place means retracting from everyone and everything, for Bhakti Yogis, it's about actually engaging with the devotees who also have that one-minded, one fixed point of serving Krishna and rendering service to him. Then if we talk about sitting postures, now from a Bhakti Yogi perspective, there is no sitting posture per se. There is nothing that we can do without chanting. We can chant whilst we're sitting, whilst we're walking, whilst we're standing. We can even chant without tulsi beads in the bathroom, right? So there's no impediment, there's nothing to say, there's no rules and regulations in a way, in a very simple way, to chanting the holy names. So what is this whole aspect of, well, okay, sitting postures during Dhyana Yoga? Why do we sit on the mats, for example? The whole aspect is that we can take aspects from the other yogas, like Dhyana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, etc., to help us have that better mind and better consciousness for our Bhakti Yoga practices. So sitting in the lotus position, back straight, helps us in chanting japa better, because it clears the mind. It creates a one point. It is said from a Dhyana Yogi perspective, and even like other religions, that actually this lotus posture creates that one point towards the skies, which in a lot of religions is where they refer to God being up there. So we're basically directing all of our energy to go up there so that we can get the energy whilst we're chanting. So if we go through the purport, then Srila Prabhupada ends the purport with actually talking about how in Kali Yuga, which is the day and age that we're in, there's really only one method that is most prominent, and that is the chanting of the holy name. That is our saving grace, I guess, as the Westerners would call it. In terms of devotional service, there's actually nine different devotional activities that we can get involved with. Right? So if we go through them, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. So in English, those translate to hearing, chanting, remembering the Lord, serving the Lord at his lotus feet, deity worship, praying, executing orders, serving as a friend, and complete surrender. In Kali Yuga, our minds are so disturbed, as we already established, right? David Prabhu gave the example of a football pitch, right? Where the football's going left, right, center, everywhere, into the goal, outside the goal, maybe even outside the court.
Right.
And that still affects us in Bhakti Yoga. Our minds are still very chanchal, right? Even in practicing Bhakti. But the whole aspect of devotional service is not that we simply focusing on one-minded, do nothing, just chant. We will get there eventually. The whole aspect of these 9 stages is that we use all these stages to help us get to the point where we can chant in that mood that we're fully focused on the japa. the aspect here is that actually when we're chanting, we have to focus our mind on something. And as we know, that something should be the holy names. It should be Krishna, his pastimes. And when you get really advanced, then you'll even start seeing the pastimes. But how do we do that if we don't establish that relationship with Krishna? If all we've heard is the Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, but we don't know what any of the words mean, we don't know what any of the names mean, we don't know who Krishna is, then we might be able to chant it for a couple of hours, but we won't be fully absorbed in it. Because the way we get absorbed in something is by establishing that as a relationship that we want to grow in, right? If we want to absorb ourselves in someone or something, we have an attraction towards it, we have a taste for it. And in that mood, the whole aspect here is that in order to develop that taste for the holy names, for chanting the holy names, we have to engage all of our senses in serving the holy names. And the way we do that is through these 9 processes. So when we're chanting, we're already engaging in hearing and chanting, and even remembering the holy names. But then there's things like serving the Lord's his lotus feet, deity worship, praying, executing orders, serving as a friend, complete surrender. We have to engage ourselves in those, and that comes naturally as well. As we want to establish a relationship with Krishna, we start realizing that, okay, my japa is not good. Why is it not good? Because I don't fully appreciate the holy names. I don't fully appreciate who Krishna is. Like, okay, I know he's a cowherd boy, I know he's blue in color and complexion, but what does he like to eat? What does he like to wear? What does he like to do in his day-to-day activities? I mean, we've all got friends, I hope. And when we want to really establish that friendship, when we want to go deeper, when we want to make that person a best friend, we are naturally interested in learning about all these things. And then as time goes on, we naturally remember them. Small things will remind us of them. And if we want to remember Krishna at all times, if we want to be able to serve the holy names at all times, chant the holy names at all times, that is one thing that we have to do, is actually establish that relationship with Krishna, learn about Krishna, read about Krishna, hear about Krishna, especially through the pure devotees. So there's an example that I actually had, I don't know where I got this from, but it's about the whole meditation aspect of when we're chanting or doing japa. This applies not just to japa, but also many other meditations. And the way I was seeing it is that, so David Prabhu came up with the example of a football pitch, but I was thinking of a radio, right? A static radio whereby, you haven't fine-tuned it yet because you don't know what station to actually connect to, so you're still trying to fine-tune it. Now, in that case, like, if you think about the radio, then you've got a lot of static feedback because you're not in tune with the correct frequency of the radio station that you want to connect to. And the way you actually connect to the correct frequency is not by focusing on the static, right? It's by focusing on the station, on the actual message or the radio station's voice, right? You don't try and eliminate the static, you try and perfect this radio station signal, the frequency. So when we're fine-tuning, we don't think about, okay, oh, there's more static here, there's less static here. We're actually thinking, oh, it's the radio station is clearer here, but not so clear here. So when I was thinking about this in regards to japa, this is one of the things that I was thinking about, which is where when we're chanting and all these different thoughts come into our heads and minds, then this is something Srila Prabhupada has always said, and it's quite famous. It's where does the mind come into the chanting? It's just hearing, it's just chanting and hearing. But what does this actually mean? Because our minds constantly get bombarded with different things, right? With a different static from the radio stations. And the whole aspect here is that instead of focusing on those aspects of, I need to get rid of this thought about, I don't know, this person that I spoke to, I need to get rid of this thought about the argument that I had 2 minutes ago, we actually focus on, okay, I want to focus on my chanting, I want to focus on the holy names. So instead of trying to eliminate the arguments and all the other thoughts, we actually focus more on how can we make the chanting more prominent. And in that way, it gets clearer and clearer. It was a personal one that resonated with me. Hopefully it helps. Yeah, and we finish at 8:30, right? Cool. Okay. That's good. Okay. Yeah, so I can end there. So ultimately, just doing a quick summary of the verse, 6.11 to 6.12, whilst it's talking about sitting postures, the core principle is given at the last sentence, which is the yogi should then sit on it very firmly and practice yoga to purify the heart by controlling his mind, senses and activities and fixing the mind on one point. And going through the list, we established that, okay, Dhyana Yoga does not actually work in this day and age. In fact, in any day and age, because the whole aspect of trying to really meditate on voidness or something is very difficult. It takes many years to perfect. And so Krishna has already established that Bhakti Yoga is the highest. And the way we actually practice Bhakti Yoga is by focusing on Krishna, which is something tangible that we can actually focus on our minds on, because we have a lot of different methods to help us focus on building that relationship with Krishna. And even in the purport, Srila Prabhupada establishes that actually our connection to Krishna, our connection to yoga, is through the topmost yoga, which is serving and establishing that connection with Krishna. So, thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Maybe you can share some advice, or like even like Srinivas Prabhuji is here. So like like from childhood, like I know when I started chanting, it's because your parents tell you to chant. So even now I still feel like in my life I'm just chanting because like there's somebody like watching over me, so I need to like there's like you said, there's that level to connect to Krishna. It's not there for me as yet, and it's been so many years. So why is it that even though like you're chanting, but you're chanting because maybe like your parents told you to do it, your spiritual master told you to do it, or is there like connection to Krishna because we're listening to those seniors?
Do you want Srinivas Prabhu? So the question was referring to how a lot of the times we chant because we're told to chant, either through parents if we were born in or growing up in devotional families, or spiritual master told us to chant or something like that. But if you have anything, please share those. I can share one thing.
Haribo. Yeah, so in the story of Ajamil, the point is given, why did the Yamudutas come to him? Because he wasn't chanting the holy name with feeling. This Jiva Goswami is saying. So if you chant the holy name with feeling, then the benefit will be much more faster. And the other thing is, this is Lord Chaitanya, he's saying that if someone doesn't have the conviction that the holy name is not different from Krishna, and the holy name is full of unlimited potencies, that person cannot chant the holy name all the time. So you have to have that, in other words, you have to understand the greatness of Krishna, then chanting becomes easier, like you said.
Yeah, so to echo that for Mataji, so the whole aspect of us listening to seniors, whether it's parents,